Our guest is someone who doesn't just write about barbecue, he documents it, preserves it, and explains why it matters. He's a nationally respected food writer, culinary historian, and one of the foremost voices on the history of Southern barbecue. He's the contributing barbecue editor for Southern Living, a longtime restaurant critic in Charleston, and the author of Barbecue, The History of an American Institution, a book that should be required reading for anyone who loves barbecue as much as we do. He's also written some other books, which we are going to get into in just a little while. But our guest, he's more than barbecue. He's explored Southern food culture, classic cocktails, another one of his books, and the stories behind what we eat and drink. If you've ever wondered how barbecue became woven into the fabric of American culture, the same way baseball has become our national pastime, then our guest is the one to speak to. We are excited, thrilled, honored to welcome someone who I can't believe it has taken us 8 years to have him on the show. What is wrong with us? we, this is bad. But anyway, it's better late than never. We are so glad to welcome Robert Moss to the Baseball and BBQ podcast. Welcome, Robert.
Oh, well, thanks. Well, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
And we thank the person who helped bring you onto the show, and that is our dear friend Doug Scheiding. And Doug, you are the guest co-host, and you get to throw out the first pitch.
Oh.
Awesome.
Give me a slider.
No. I just want to set the table here. So let's hear how you got into journalism. You just told me about going to college at Furman, and then also your connection and getting into Southern Living.
Yeah. Oh, wow. So that's a bit of a circuitous route. It was not planned out, but
Okay.
I got into food writing and journalism via the historical route. I actually came through the academic world. I went to Furman, as we were talking before recording started, for my undergrad. But then after that, which is in Greenville, South Carolina, which is where I grew up. And then I headed down the road 100 miles to Columbia, South Carolina, and went to graduate school at the University of South Carolina in Columbia. So I went from vinegar sauce territory to mustard sauce territory for graduate school.
Good
And we'll talk,
reference
I'm
there.
sure, yeah, well, I'm sure we'll get to that at some point, but I'd never had mustard sauce until I went to graduate school 100 miles down the road in Columbia, because barbecue was very regionalized back then. But I ended up getting a PhD in English at the University of South Carolina, primarily because I had no idea what I wanted to do with myself, but I really enjoyed reading a lot of books and doing, and as I was reading a lot of literature, a lot of fiction for my PhD, I got more and more interested in social history. I got more and more interested in how people lived. And if I went back and did it again, I probably would have got a PhD in histories. But I ended up really getting into food and food history. And so I finished my PhD in literature and was looking for another project. And I said, I'm going to go to the library and check out a book on the history of barbecue, because I always loved barbecue since I was, probably a teenager, and loved food history. And I said, let's go see what's out there. Well, I got to the library, and a giant research library. There was no book on the history of barbecue. About the only thing you could find. There are 2 or 3 pages in books of culinary history, or maybe like a Southern food history book, but there was no book on barbecue. So I started researching it. And before long, I realized, well, I think I need to write that book. So I wrote Barbecue, The History of American Institution. That took me a long time, several years. But that sort of got me into the barbecue world and the food writing world. I
Ah,
moved to Charleston, South Carolina, from Columbia down to Charleston, which, if you've not been to Charleston, is a great food city. And I happened to land in Charleston just as the Charleston food scene was blowing up. also at the same time that blogs were sort of becoming big. And so I started a Charleston food blog, just writing about the restaurants I went to and stuff like that, like a lot of people did. But somehow I got hooked up with this Charleston City paper, which was the local alt weekly in Charleston. Started reviewing restaurants from Charleston, and then or in Charleston, and the barbecue book came out, and one thing led to another. I can talk more about how I ended up at Southern Living, but I started writing about restaurants and barbecue and everything else. So I came through it from history, and then started writing about more contemporary barbecue stuff, and the rest is 20 years later. Here I am.
Wow, I hadn't heard that circuitous route.
Yeah.
The
Yeah,
rest
it
is
was not
barbecue
planned out. It
history.
was like, well, I just sort of did what I enjoyed and followed one thing after another, and here I am.
Wow.
Robert, I have not been to Charleston, South Carolina. I know I got to get there one day. Sounds delicious place to go. But I want to know, in your view, what defines truly great barbecue?
Well, and this is actually sort of a controversial topic in some ways because I do a top 50 barbecue list for Southern Living where I
Yes, you
sort of
do.
rank barbecue restaurants in the South. And there's different ways to judge barbecue. You can sort of do it on just the food itself, right? Which is sort of like the competition style barbecue judging, which I've done. I've judged a lot of barbecue competitions, including I've been a judge at Memphis in May, and it's fun. But I don't like judging barbecue just in a vacuum, right? Not just like, eating it by itself. So obviously it has to taste great to be good barbecue. It has to really, hit your taste buds. I mean, you've eaten a lot of good barbecue, you sort of know that flavor. I'm partial to wood cooked barbecue. I sort of you can tell almost, I think, the layer of smoke. You got to have that flavor to it. Um, on this same time, it can't be too smoky. One of the worst things you can do is over smoke barbecue, and it's like eating like tasting something that got dragged through a house fire or something like that. So you want that subtle smoke, you want good flavor, juiciness, all that. So you want all that kind of stuff. That's good barbecue, but to get really great barbecue, I think it's the whole experience. When I do the top 50 list for Southern Living, it's about what's this place like to go to? What's it like to show up and stand in line? What's it like to eat? And I think anybody who spends a lot of time in the food world knows that so much about what we eat is what's in our brains and everything that's happening around you. Like a great dinner with a great conversation, a bottle of wine, all that kind of things is going to be better than maybe some chef cooked dinner where you're eating it by yourself sitting on a counter somewhere. I think it's the same with barbecue. So for me, great barbecue is not only tastes delicious, but it's a wonderful thing. I like it if it's unexpected, if it's something new and different. And those are the kind of things that sort of push it over the top in terms of what gets into the top of my top barbecue list.
So not just the taste of the food, but like the overall experience going to a place. I would think that would really make a great barbecue.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, there's a little bit of a balance because, like, this is where I get into trouble when I talk about Texas, because I'm not a big fan of waiting in long lines. That's not something we do in the Carolinas. In the Carolinas, you're used to walking right in and you play order at the counter at some places now, but it used to always be you walk in, sit at the table, order from waitress, they bring the stuff out. Waiting a long line in Texas is sort of a different Texas thing. However, that being said, it sort of depends what the line's like. If it's just a long line in a blacktop parking lot and it's hot and you're just sitting out there and there's just a bunch of people, that's not a lot of fun. But if you go to a place like Snow's, which has turned the line into Snow's in Lexington, Texas, turned the line into like an entire experience where you show up well before dawn because they open the doors at 8 a.m. for some interesting historical reasons. But you show up in the dark and then you're hanging out and it's so cold. And then as the sun starts coming up, people start to get friendly and talking. And next thing you know, you're meeting people from all over the place. I've had some more fantastic experiences in the line. It snows and, the 3 hours goes pretty fast. And then you get inside, of course, the barbecue's great. So all that comes together, and that to me makes it a great barbecue experience. This is why Snow's is in the well into the top 10 of my top 50 barbecue
Number
joints in
two.
the South.
Yeah.
It's number
So
two as
basically,
of this last year, and who knows? Next time I go, it may go up or down. We'll see. But yeah, it's number two this in 2025.
so basically, you're eating brisket for breakfast is
That's
what
right.
you're doing. But
Well, actually, if you're at Snow's, it wasn't breakfast because I got there. It was still dark. It was probably about 6 a.m. By the time I got into the little house and got my tray, it was probably 11. So it was breakfast for
Okay.
or a brisket for lunch. Though I think they started handing out the free beer about 8, so that helped, improve
Wow.
the line experience a little bit.
Oh, that's a fun one. Um, I wasn't even going to go here yet. I did have a question written down as far as what makes a great barbecue restaurant. But when you do a show and there are three hosts, the line of questioning can sometimes end up somewhere. So I'm going to ask you this. I was thinking about it too because you're rating all these restaurants, and obviously it's on taste and it's on ambiance and all of that. And I started thinking about barbecue in general. And when you get a plate, when you get a tray of barbecue and the meats are on there and you've got your breads, and I thought about how important when you rate these barbecue places are the sides.
I think they're really important. Um, Especially the as we sort of hit this moment 10 years ago, I'd say, or with the craft barbecue joints where everyone's making brisket, everyone's making ribs, everyone's doing pulled pork, and it's all really good, right? It's not like you go to one place and this brisket is like so transcendent and this brisket is terrible. It's all pretty good. So what puts you over the top then becomes everything else that's on the plate. And this is something has changed just in the period of time I've been writing about barbecue. It used to be that you went to a barbecue joint in South Carolina, the sides were an afterthought. They opened a big old giant can of corn and dumped it in a steam table and green beans in a steam table. Maybe they made mac and cheese using somebody's recipe, but the sides were just something that you put on the plate. Not anymore. I mean, everybody's getting really serious about it. One of the things I think of that puts barbecue over the top for me is things like the bread. Because for a long time, you would go to a barbecue joint in Texas or in South Carolina. It'd be like a big old thing of sunbeam white bread in a bag on the table. Increasingly, there are places that are making their own bread, and they're making white bread, like Goldie's in Fort Worth is one that bakes their own bread. I was just down in Florida eating, and there's a place called Smoke Made Meats in Orlando, and the bread was this homemade white bread that they made. It was delicious. It was absolutely fantastic. It's like, well, if I have to choose, everyone's making good brisket, but would you want the industrial bread or do you want the fresh bread that's so delicious? So I do think, yeah, if you walk in someplace and the ribs are mushy and falling off the bone and the brisket's dried out, the sides aren't going to save it. But if you're talking about comparing a place with good brisket here and a good brisket here, but then everything on the side menu is great, then that really makes a big difference, especially these days when everybody's game has just gone up and up and up. I would say in the past 10 years.
Yeah, when Jeff
Yeah,
and I
that's
were when Jeff and I made a trip to Kansas City and we were waiting in line, and Doug, you're next, but when we were
That's
waiting
right.
in line, people were saying to us, and I can't remember what side it was, but I know we ordered it, and they kept saying, "Oh, you've got to get they weren't saying you got to get the ribs, you got to get
Yeah.
the pulled pork. You got that. That is, of course, that's a given. They were saying you have to get that, and there was a certain side. Oh, you wouldn't believe this side, and they were right. It was great. I can't remember what it was, but so yeah, absolutely. The sides, people do talk about the sides, and
Yeah,
it
and we could
becomes
talk all
important.
night about macaroni and cheese and how it used to be just sort of, whatever they dumped out of the box and mix it up. Now people are going crazy about mac and cheese and like doing like chemical wizardry and all that kind of stuff. And I've had some incredible mac and cheese that I have to stop eating because if I keep eating it, I won't be able to, actually eat any barbecue because the mac and cheese fills you up so much.
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned the bread because I'm catering a wedding this weekend and I'm making macaroni and cheese fresh. That's the only thing I'm making fresh, and I almost forgot the sourdough bread that I need to take. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, you got to bring good bread. Don't bring the loaf of
Ex-
sunbeam.
exactly, it's the details. So I
That's right.
appreciate that
And
you're
pickles.
mentioning.
There are so many places
Oh
now that are
yeah,
making their own pickles, and
yeah.
like you can open a jar of pickles and they're fine. But when you go to a place that really nails the pickles, boy, that's even better.
Absolutely. So I have a couple questions. Number on the top 50, keeping with that theme, is did you get much flack for three out of the top five being Texas, and then Texas being 17 of the 50, which is quite a few, quite a few. And in the article, it was Texas was mentioned only 64 times.
So did I get so did I get flack
Did you get
for
flack
too much
from,
Texas?
from too much
No,
Texas?
I
I
did
mean,
not. I got
I
flacks from some people, I think, for not enough Texas, and which is
oh, not enough
only
Texas.
17 out of the 50. But no, I really didn't. And Texas is tough because, if you look at the list, there's the top 50, and then there's what I consider on the bubble, which are the ones that didn't quite make it up into the 50. And there's a ton more Texas places that make it in there
Right.
because the level of barbecue in Texas is really, really good. So it's really hard to me, at least, to differentiate between, one and the other. And you go one day and go on the next day, they might bubble up and down. But no, I did not get too much flack for Texas this time around, though they certainly had a lot of entries in there. But I think if you just look at sort of the, you know, population relative to what's defined as the South, I think it's probably pretty even with I think it's 22 million people in Texas. So, I think it's probably representative of the ratio of the population of Texas to the rest of the South because
Okay.
it's a huge state.
It
There's
is. Yeah.
so much
Yeah.
there.
Well, all right. I've got a comment on this other one, and then I've got a question about it. So, do you remember the late great Chuck Blount? That was a food writer here.
I do, yes.
Yes.
I
Okay.
never met Chuck. I knew him only through his writing.
Yeah. So he wrote for the San Antonio Express here. So
Yep.
he wrote he wrote several articles about barbecue cooking, and I was in a couple of them. So one was in Southern Living, believe it or not, and it was on the spray spritz bottle, and because I was one of the first person to use that as a spritzer for
Oh, really?
barbecue. Yeah,
Yeah.
because just the fine, etc.
Yep.
So, but it was picked up. I thought, oh man, it was Robert. No, it was picked up by Perry Ormont Bloomberg. Um, it, and I thought that was kind of strange. So it led me to the question, long route here. Is it just you that's going to all these restaurants, or do you have a team? And how hard is it to manage other people and how they're grading versus how you grade?
Oh, okay. Well, I think the key thing here is that I'm the contributing barbecue editor for Southern Living.
Okay.
Contributing is the key word there. So, what that means is I am a freelancer. I'm not a staffer. So I'm not a full-time employee for Southern Living. I
Oh,
sort
they're
of
not
get paid.
bankrolling you on this deal
That
then.
well, no, they pay me, right? I get
Okay.
paid,
All right.
but I get sort of
Okay.
paid by the article, and we sort of work out. They'll pay some travel expenses and things like that. But I do not run I'm not on staff and running the magazine. So I
Gotcha.
write. They tend to throw all the barbecue stuff to me, sort of first dibs. But a lot of times, other people will pick up other barbecue stories. So you will see barbecue stories that appear in the Southern Living. They don't get run by me for editing or anything like that. So I'm the barbecue editor, contributing editor, but I don't edit everything on barbecue that comes through. That said, I have a really great relationship with Sid Evans and Chrissy Tiglis, who are uh, the editor in chief and the managing editor, if I remember the titles correctly, of Southern Living, and we do conspire on the plan for the year and all that kind of stuff. But they'll always run some barbecue things through that I don't touch simply because I'm not a full time staffer for them, and they have a magazine to get out without waiting for me to get back to them on
Right. Right.
all the email questions and things like that.
So is it just you then that's grading and going to all these places?
On the top 50 list, yeah, that
Yeah.
one is very much
Wow.
me.
Okay.
And I think, I talked about this a little bit. It's different than other publications that do these, where they sort of send a team of staffers out to eat
Yeah.
and with
DV
grade sheets
Vaughn
and
has a
stuff like
kind of
that.
a scout team that kind of
Yeah, he
goes
does
out.
that. He sends that out. I sort of do it by proxy, I always think, which is to say, I don't like pick and visit every barbecue restaurant in the South. There would be no way I could do that. Not humanly possible. But I don't send out, junior staffers to go check things out. And in fact, I almost don't want to. What I do have is a network of friends, and like some of them are writers, some of them are just people who like barbecue, some of them are restaurateurs. Um, I have a wide network that I tap into for recommendations. So anywhere time I'm going to an area, I just went down to Florida. I reach out to people who either live there or I know visited there, or people who are in the barbecue community down there and say, "Hey, where do I need to go?" So I get recommendations, and that feeds into sort of the short list, if you will, that I then narrow down to. But no, I don't. It's just me in terms of the actual visits. And it's me making the choices. So if you disagree with the top 50, it wasn't like some, 18-year-old intern went there and put the wrong score in the scorecard. It was all me, and you can blame me for that.
I will say that burnt bean's way too high. Yeah, yeah, it should have been much lower because when I go to burnt bean, it's old home week and it's barbecue people that are there. So I don't eat barbecue out much, and that's where you see other pit masters, pit makers. It's pretty amazing. So maybe
Yeah.
next time.
No, well, I've been to Burnt Bean several times. I'm a big fan of it. It just did not quite bubble up to some of the other places where I had
Got it.
excellent
Got it.
experiences.
We all have bad days.
It's actually sort of funny. I don't think there's anything bad. I mean, you get in the top 50, good grief, that's pretty good in all of the South. But it's like I sort of put one here and I put one here, and then well, if I had to recommend, this is always the rule of thumb I use. If I had to say you could only go to one of these two places, which would I say you go to? And again, it's for me, it's not back to just which one has absolutely empirically the best barbecue on a scale of 1 to 100, graded on the 14-point scale. It's like which one do you just really need to go visit and experience? And so that's where I think atmosphere and history and some things like that can sort of tilt the scale a little bit
Mhm.
toward a place that, all things equal on the barbecue front, go to the place that has something really really interesting and cool about the setting versus someplace that is really really good, but it's a little bit more generic of a place.
Robert, I'm going to ask you about one of your publications. You wrote a book called Barbecue, The History of an American Institution. So my question to you is, when did you realize barbecue was more than just food, but a history?
So that was actually going back to the origin story. That was the book that came out of me going to the library and really looking to read about the history of barbecue, and I went into it with a couple of misperceptions when I started the research that I changed. I went in initially thinking I was going to write a book called Barbecue: The History of a Southern Institution. That was actually the working title. And the more I researched it, the more I realized no, is because in this was in the early 2000s, um, barbecue is very much a Southern thing. There was not a lot of barbecue in New England. There was very little barbecue in the West Coast. And I was thinking, well, it's just something in the South. That's where it developed. That's where it sort of its history is, and maybe a little bit snuck out here and there, but it's a Southern thing. And then the more I researched the book, the more I realized, no, no, it's actually going to be called Barbecue: The History of American Institution, because it really was in the 19th century, at least, in every part of the United States. The other thing that I thought going into the book was I thought it was a relatively recent thing, relatively historically speaking. I thought it was going to be something that sort of came along around the turn of the 20th century, maybe. Restaurants and stuff started coming up, people started cooking barbecue. Um, and I've sort of figured it would be a 100-year, 150-year history. The more I got into it, the more I realized, and that's because at that point, most people who had written about the history of barbecue were writing about the history of restaurants, and so they were tracing restaurants back to the early 20th century, which is sort of when they all got their start. What I did not realize was how big barbecue was in the 19th century. It was gigantic. It was like one of the premier social institutions throughout the US. And it was that way not just in the 19th century, but back into the colonial era. So I found all this stuff about George Washington hosting barbecues, how intimate outdoor barbecues were to early politics. And actually, as you trace the history of barbecue, you sort of trace the history of American culture, American politics, American history. It's all sort of tied into barbecue. I can talk a little bit about why I think that is. But I realized as I dug into the history that wow, there's so much about it that goes way, way far back. And so basically, this is not a book about 20th century food and how it evolved into what we know today. This is a book about American history and the culture of America and how barbecue tied into that.
Robert, your ranking for your restaurant, Here we have the New York Times, and if a restaurant gets a great review from the New York Times, forget it. You can't get in there. That's, that. And your ranking, your list is like receiving a Michelin star. I mean, that is really incredible praise. And to think that you have now, you have a power. It's almost like, you know, you really have become, your list is such that people debate it. People will are desperate to be on it. So that's quite an accomplishment that you've achieved that. Because when your list first came out, I'm sure, you know, I don't know that people cared as much as they certainly do now.
Yeah, it certainly has grown over time. I'm always a little bit amazed that I'm doing this at times. Um, I always say about the list though that it's not the same as it's not like my I have all this power in the ability that I can like make or break a restaurant or shut something down or anything like that. I don't think any critic or writer these days can do that. What I think the power of that list is like if I write about Snow's barbecue or Lexington barbecue in Lexington, North Carolina, eh, their story is out there. It's not like everybody knows about them, and where I put them on the list is interesting, but it's not that big of a deal. It's more when I can find places that are a little bit off the beaten path that people
Hmm.
haven't necessarily gone to before. And you can shine a light on a place that is I think is really, really good and deserving and get the attention for it. So that to me is a good part about it. I could go out and write something so totally slagging, I won't name a restaurant, but pick your favorite restaurant that is, been on the top of everybody's list. It's not going to affect their business. They'll still have a line out the door the next day.
Right.
However, some of the really rewarding things is to be able to say, look, I went to this little place in Tennessee that you never heard of, and it's fantastic, and you should check it out, and be able to share that knowledge, and then people go and check it out, and when they say, yeah, I agree with you, that's a really good place. I'm glad you put it on the list. Then that's the best part about the job.
Right. I have seen restaurants that have. I saw one restaurant. It was upstate New York, like in the Catskills. It was this little dive, and I guess there was a reporter for. I think it was the Times. This was years ago when I was a kid, and they did a. They just were traveling, and they happened to stop in this place, and they did a story on it. The next year we went back to this place. They had added on to it, like had done a whole edition. It was like the place had totally changed. So you're being, you can definitely, you're right. You could definitely elevate a place from obscurity.
Yeah.
So now let's get back to the history of barbecue. And I really am fascinated by the history of barbecue, but because not Doug, but Jeff and I, we're backyard cooks. So I'm curious, when and what was the one device or the one item that made barbecue such a backstream mainstay?
Yeah. Well,
Not
if you
backstream, I'm sorry, backyard
backyard mainstay.
mainstay.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
actually write a good bit about this whole chapter about this in the history book that I wrote. And I think it's really interesting because if you're in the South, and you say we're going to have a barbecue, that means a certain thing, right? We're going to put a big old pig on a whole pit in the backyard. Uh, in the Northeast, it's, if you say come over to the barbecue, you're bound to find hamburgers and hot dogs on the grill in the backyard when people are there. And for a long time, I sort of assumed that those things are, I don't know how the word got connected, but they're two different things. They actually evolve out of the same tradition. So, barbecue up until the 20th century was a outdoor tradition, giant outdoor tradition. And the key thing you got to remember, there was no refrigeration. And the second key thing is that there was no you couldn't go buy cuts of meat at the butcher shop that and keep them for very long because there was no refrigeration. So barbecues were held outdoors, giant feasts. You cook animals in the unit of one. And you may have one pig or you may have 20 pigs and goats and sheep and cows and whatever because they're usually donated by farmers. They bring them to the place where the barbecue is going to be. And if it's July, you had to slaughter them and put them in the pit right away because that is not going to keep in a 90-degree heat in the South. So it was a outdoor cooking tradition, whole animal tradition, occasional, usually free, put on by the community, farmers donating whatever livestock they could put on. So that's the 19th century. You get into the 20th century, and you have this little bit of a divergence. You start to get refrigeration, you start to get meat packing, and you could buy different cuts. There are wholesalers and things like that. Restaurants started evolving. I write about that a whole bunch. But at the same time, you had America suburbanizing. So up until the 1920s, the U.S. was largely rural. More than 50% of the people lived on farms, lived out in the countryside. It wasn't until the 20th century that you started getting a lot of people in the cities, and then the suburbs really started to develop. And suddenly people who had grown up in cities, they're moving out to the suburbs. They get backyards for the first time because you didn't really have backyards in the city. You didn't have backyards on a farm. You had a giant farm. But there was a lot of nostalgia for that old rural traditions like barbecues. Barbecues in California became for whatever reason, they became this very popular thing back at the East Coast to read about barbecues on these ranches or ranchos out in California in the 1920s. Suddenly in the 1920s, you start seeing these articles in things like Women's Home Companion and Good Housekeeping and all these sort of these magazines, mass magazines aimed at suburban families, saying, here's a great idea for how to entertain. Have a California style barbecue in your backyard. In the 1920s, they actually had you dig a little pit in the ground, but you would cook instead of a pig, you would cook like some kind of cut of beef because you could get that, or you would cook a shoulder. Along came brazier grills and these other little grills that basically took that up out of the ground. And I read a whole bunch about it. But really, the rise of the automobile, Ford Motor Company, what we know is Kingsford charcoal now was originally
Right.
Ford charcoal. It was sold in bags to people to help sell automobiles because you could take it out in the country with your little brazier grill and you could cook out in the backyard. So basically, the backyard barbecue evolved as a way to sort of replicate the big outdoor barbecue, but on a small scale in your suburban backyard for a small group. After World War II, it just really boomed. Everybody came back from the war. The suburbs were booming. People wanted to have the good life, and that's when you really started to see the rise of charcoal grills when Weber kettles were introduced to the market. 1960s, you see gas grills. So it's really after World War II that they sort of took a divergent branch. Barbecue became much more of a restaurant thing. The big outdoor barbecues have faded away, but in the backyard. Now suddenly you have all the equipment, you have a whole industry, you have grills, you have charcoal, you have a whole industry around it that's developed, and they've just sort of gone down their separate paths ever since to the point where we are now with like the outdoor griddles and the Komodo grills and the pellet cookers and everything else.
I love, and Greg, I've got to mention the Barbecue Central show because, like Greg has said, you have really brought it this year. And it's your frequency with your writing, you're going, the back to the cue sheet that
Yep.
I think started in COVID and stuff, and now your newsletter with the Substack and everything. You have It's like you've got renewed energy, and I don't know what your end game is or why what the change is, but you are very prolific now, very instrumental. I mean, are you trying to become the barbecue historian, as known for that, or what is the impetus in terms of the increase in writing in the articles
Part of that, no, it's
in
less
history
trying.
in history?
Yeah, well, I was always interested in this. It's sort of built over time. I always would say I sort of fell into, if I tell the whole story of how I got into food writing and everything else, everything just sort of happened, and it happened from me like following what I was interested in and trying,
Yeah.
like I got really interested in history and did that, and then that led to a blog, which led to writing food criticism, which led me to meeting Hunter Lewis, who these was at the time an editor at Southern Living, who's now the editor at Food and Wine, which led to the whole Southern Living. So it was one thing after another. I think it's more just where I am in life, which is, I think we talked, I think maybe it was before we started recording. I have my younger son is in college now, so we've got empty nesters. I'm sort of, able to travel more. I've got a
More
lot more.
time.
Yeah, the more time that I didn't used to have. And so I'm in a
Okay.
position now that I'm starting to knuckle down and just do whatever the heck I want, frankly. And what I want to do, it turns out, is drive
Ah,
around to eat barbecue and write about it. The getting back to the newsletter, so you will probably talk at some point about the how to find the Robert F. Moss newsletter. But it's a
yes.
Substack newsletter that I started back up. I had done one during COVID, and yeah, it just turned out it's not. I don't have a specific goal in mind, but I just enjoy doing it. I wake up in the morning and think, hey, I want to write on the newsletter for a while. So I'll do that and churn things out. So we'll see what 2026 leads to, but I'm looking to really dig in. I've already started a bunch of travel. I've got a bunch of travel planned for 2026 to really get out and really hit the road and
Oh, where are you
hit
going?
all those places. Well, you name it. From the four corners of the South. So I just finished up a big trip down to Florida, where I
Florida.
drove all the way down the east coast of Florida, all the way to Miami, eating at barbecue all the way and all the way back up. I'm going to spend a lot of time out in your neck of the woods, Doug, in Texas in 2026. I've got,
Okay, let me know.
yeah, I'm definitely going to hit you up. I want to hit some of those. Texas is so big, but I'm going to rent a car at some point and just, you know, blow the miles on it hit every corner of Texas all the way out, from the Rio Grande Valley all the way out to El Paso. So we'll see, but I've got a bunch of travel planned, and it's just more because point in life where I can do it, and B, that's what's interesting to me right now. And if I get
Yeah.
tired of it, I'll go do something else. Yeah.
Well, real quick, Jeff. 20 minutes. I live 20 minutes away, and we can go to Terry Black's and the original Blacks and Cooper's and walk from all three of them in New Braunfels. You pointed that
Oh,
out.
okay.
That yeah, that Terry Black is going so close to Kent Black's restaurant and
That's
stuff. So
right. Yeah,
just
you can just
crazy.
stumble across the parking lot from one
Yes,
to the
yes,
next,
yes,
which is
yes.
I didn't realize that. I wrote about my newsletter. I saw that they were, that Terry Black's is opening in New Braunfels near it. I didn't realize that I Google mapped it. Oh my
It's
God,
the
it's the same shopping plaza.
It's the
It's
same,
like,
parking lot, like you
yeah,
said.
you walk
And then
out one front door, you can see the other one.
if you walk
It's-
just down the hill a little bit, there's
yeah.
Cooper's right there too. So it's funny. But
Oh
yes.
man. Yeah, so I need to do that. That'll probably take about an hour and a half to hit all three of them. Right?
Right. Walking.
Yeah, walking.
Robert, you wrote books on barbecue. You write for Southern Living on barbecue. You go to all these barbecue restaurants, the top 50. Do you cook barbecue?
I do. I am not a. I'm not a backyard gadget kind of person. I've got I by and large use a Weber kettle for most of the things that I cook these days. I do have a couple of other pits out in the back that I do cook on. I have an offset pit I never use. I've got what I call a hot box, which is a direct heat pit where you can actually shovel coals up underneath it. It's basically just a cheap metal box that I got at a big box store. But that's very much the way you cook things in the old school way in the Carolinas. I don't cook as much in the backyard now as I did in the past. In part, I think, is because it's just me and my wife. Yeah, every now and again we'll have some either we'll have family come over or something like that, and I'll cook some things. I tend to do a lot of what I call wood roasting, which is firing up the Weber kettle, get it up to about 450 degrees. Um, and I'll do a whole chicken, I'll do fish, I'll do things like that on it. You can do that in 2 hours, which is a little bit more manageable. I don't have it's hard for me to do a 12-hour, pork shoulder cook these days. And I'm not the kind to go get the big pellet cooker and set it and forget it. I want to be out there actively shoveling things. But yeah, I've cooked a good bit over the years, cooked whole hogs and cinder block pits and things like that, usually with friends and things like that. Things like that. I hope to do that a little bit more. I do have an appointment coming up in the summer to do a whole hog party with a friend, where we'll cook a whole hog overnight on cinder block pits, sort of the old South Carolina way. But yeah, I cook a little bit, but I'm much more a writer historian than I'm not a recipe guy or anything like that. I just like I like hanging out by a barbecue pit. That's the idea of a good time.
Well, you are a prolific author. I'm looking at a list of books that you've written. You have The Roughagnac, A History of an Iconic New Orleans Cocktail, The Lost Southern Chefs, A History of Commercial Dining in the 19th Century South, Barbecue, The History of an American Institution, Southern Spirits, 400 Years of Drinking in the American South, Going Lardcore, Adventures in New Southern Dining, and Barbecue Lovers Carolinas. Did I miss anything?
The only thing you missed were some books I published back in my academic days on mystery writers. I did my dissertation on Raymond Chandler. You may know The Big Sleep or The Long Goodbye or those movies. So I did a couple books on Raymond Chandler before I got into food. But you hit all the food and beverage ones. You could probably see a theme there, which is I just sort of I pursue the things I'm interested in. So if I want
Nothing
to eat a
wrong with
bunch of
that.
barbecue, I'll do that. If I want to eat a bunch of restaurants, I'll do that. The Raffignac, a little book that about a cocktail in New Orleans that no one's ever heard of, but I got to go down and hang out in New Orleans and go to a bunch of bars and talk to bartenders and go to historical archives and eat at Galatoire's for lunch, which is my idea of a good couple of days. So basically, they're all excuses just to go. The research is the fun part, and at some point, you got to write it into a book. But
I mean, that's what we do with this show. It's baseball and
that's right.
barbecue. I
That's
mean,
right.
we're not talking about, we're talking about things we love. You mentioned when we first started recording about mustard sauce, and I really am curious the origin of mustard sauce. Where's that come from?
Ah. So this is a topic where I'm a bit of a contrarian. So if you go Google it and look it up and everything else, you're going to read that mustard sauce was created in the Carolinas because of the German influence. In fact, in Columbia, actually, where I went to graduate school, in the middle part of the state, there's an area called the Dutch Fork, and that's Dutch as in Deutsch, as in the Pennsylvania Dutch. There were a ton of German immigrants who moved to that part of South Carolina, the middle part of South Carolina, back in the 18th century. They settled in this little fork in the two rivers there, and it's been the Dutch Fork ever since. So the story is that Germans like mustard, Germans like pork. Therefore, the Germans in the Midlands of South Carolina started making mustard-based barbecue sauce to serve with their pork, which is a great story, except there's a little historical problem. The Germans came to the Dutch Fork in the 1700s, 1740s, 1750s, etc. German immigration basically stopped in South Carolina after that. All the Germans went to Cincinnati, they went to New York. There is virtually no German migration in the 19th century. And there's no mustard barbecue sauce in the 19th century. You don't see mustard barbecue sauce appearing until the early 20th century. So either all those Germans came to South Carolina in their they sort of like for 150 years intermarried with English and Scottish and everybody else, and then somehow that mustard preference lasted until the 20th century, or it was just a good story that we latched onto. My theory is that you see barbecue sauces in the 19th century throughout the country were pretty much uniform. They were very much like an Eastern North Carolina barbecue sauce today, which is vinegar with black and red pepper and maybe salt. A spicy vinegar based. You can look in the 19th century, you can see descriptions of that sauce in North Carolina, in Virginia, in Texas, all over the South. It's not until the 20th century that you start seeing descriptions of what we would think is the various different regional barbecue sauces. You don't really see mustard sauce appearing in South Carolina until 1930s, 1940s. So my theory is the same time, by the way, that in other parts you start seeing ketchup based sausage or tomato based sauces appearing. You started having commercial condiments introduced to the market in the early 20th century. Heinz ketchup, Heinz, and like French's mustard and all that kind of stuff. At the same time that barbecue restaurants were emerging in the 1920s, people started standardizing on sauce recipes and things like that. Why mustard in South Carolina versus ketchup in the Piedmont, North Carolina versus molasses in Memphis? I think it's because somebody's what came up with a good sauce. And if you look at how styles spread in the early restaurants, somebody would open a restaurant, some guy would come work for him for a couple of years, pick up the recipes, and then go open their restaurant of their own. In fact, in the book, my book and some other books, you could trace the family tree of all these restaurants through you sort of like the mentorship. So I really think that in South Carolina, somebody started making some mustard sauce at some point. People picked up on it. It got spread pre-internet, pre-cookbooks, anything else. How does it spread? Through word of mouth, through learning it at the hands. And it's just sort of, you get these little pockets of mustard sauce. And mustard sauce actually is much more broad than just South Carolina. You can find it in Georgia. You can find a lot of it down in Florida. I was hitting mustard sauce a ton in Florida. It's all over Texas these days. So though I think that's probably a little bit more of a relatively recent thing, but yeah. Long and short, mustard sauce, I think, developed in the early 20th century and has just sort of spread from there. And I thought it was so weird growing up in Greenville when I first encountered it down in Columbia, 100 miles away. Thought it was strange, but I love it now. And actually, it's probably the sauce I make at home the most is a mustard sauce, which I don't even need a recipe for. I just sort of squeeze the ingredients in a pan, mix it up, and off I go.
Very interesting. So uh, let's talk Alabama style
Ah,
barbecue. Because you're talking different sauces, and the only thing that I really know is the Big Bob Gibson's white sauce and stuff. And I recently made it a couple of months ago, and I wouldn't say it's great on barbecue. Maybe chicken might be okay, but it was really great eating the pizza crust. But other than that, I don't think it really belongs on barbecue. So what is Alabama style barbecue?
okay. So, well, let's start with the white sauce to begin with, which is
Yes,
like these days you'll if you think
the
Alabama,
mayo
it's Alabama white
horseradish.
sauce.
Yeah.
I had never heard of it either. It's just like the mustard sauce, up until I started getting into barbecue and um, it was, as far as I can tell, legitimately invented by Big Bob Gibson at Big
Hmm.
Bob Gibson's Barbecue in Decatur, Alabama. It was originally created by Big Bob to serve on chicken. He would dunk his chickens in it. He had a more of a traditional, more Alabama style red sauce that he would serve pork with. I've talked to Chris Lilly about it, and he actually tells me that basically Big Bob's recipe, he doesn't know exactly how, but it's basically a Piedmont, North Carolina barbecue sauce,
Huh?
but swap the take out the ketchup, put in mayo. And
Mayo.
it's basically the same thing. He doesn't know how it came about. It was always something they had at the restaurant. For a long time, you could only really find it in Northern Alabama because Big Bob did it, and then people started picking up on it. And like everything else, when barbecue sort of took off in the early 21st century, people got interested in the regional styles. They started borrowing it. I think it's great on wings. Any place that does smoked wings, a lot of places
Mm,
will do it with Alabama
okay.
white sauce. I think it's great. I would not put it on brisket. I would not put it on pork. I think it's very much a sauce for chicken, and it very much came out of Big Bob Gibson's in Decatur, Alabama. That said, there is an Alabama style barbecue. And to really understand what it is, you've got to travel through Alabama. And one of the things you'll notice if you see these barbecue joints is the pits, the chimneys. You'll see these buildings with a giant brick chimney, sort of goes up like this big block, and it sort of diagonally goes in, and then the chimney goes way up. What's inside of that, inside the restaurant, is a direct heat brick pit. And way they do it, it's very different than they'll do it anywhere else. Except you'll see some of these. This is sort of Memphis as well. You'll see it in Memphis. You'll see it in Alabama. They are cooking hot and fast. They are throwing logs underneath into the bottom of the pit, which is basically a giant fireplace. And there's big grates, probably 3 feet or more above the fire.
The
But
fire.
they're putting ribs and chicken and pork and everything right on that grate. It's not offset cooking. The flame is right up underneath it, but
Oh,
it's far
okay.
enough away. They actually have hoses. You'll see a garden hose with a sprayer hung on a little hook next to it. If fire gets kicked up, you'll see the guy spray it. They're moving the meat around with a big, like, 3 time long fork on it. It's a very distinctive style of cooking, and you'll find it. That's how the ribs are done at Dreamland, and in Tuscaloosa, at Archibald's in Northport. You can actually see chimneys like that down around Tampa. There's a place called Big John's Alabama Barbecue because the founder, Big John, came down from Alabama to Tampa in the 1960s when, the following the tourist trade. So that to me is the real Alabama style. It's just direct heat cooked on these giant brick pits. You'll still see it at lots of places in Alabama. Um, the white sauce is sort of got picked up on. I think it's great on chicken, but it's sort of like a subgenre, I guess, of
Got it.
Alabama
Got it.
barbecue.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Robert, you traveled quite extensively in the United States. Anything west of Texas or St. Louis that you recommend to go to barbecue, like in, I don't know, Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, any of those places?
I travel. I've traveled quite a bit. We hadn't talked about my other career. I made a whole career in the technology industry and doing consulting and traveling all over the country and all over the world. But I've not eaten a ton of barbecue in the Rockies or places like that. Usually, I've been there very, very briefly, and I've tried to focus on more the indigenous food than trying to see if somebody has brought good barbecue to Colorado. Though these days, I'm sure there's great stuff there. I think L.A. is actually a place where I've eaten quite a good bit of barbecue out in Los Angeles. These days it's very different, but there was an old Los Angeles style of barbecue. Most of those places are starting to fade. And it's very much sort of part of the Great Migration, usually African American cooks coming from Texas and other parts of the South to Los Angeles and sort of creating a version of Texas style barbecue that then sort of became its own thing in Los Angeles. That's one piece of it. There's also the Santa Maria, however you say it, Santa Maria style barbecue, which is much more of a hot and fast grilling steaks, which I think is a great barbecue as well. So I think LA has some really interesting stuff. Actually, my brother lives out there, which is one of the reasons I've been out there a good bit in addition to work. Though I haven't been really since the pandemic. So they've really turned over a lot, and there's a lot more craft barbecue and stuff like that I want to get out there and check out. But I think the old school California places that are still around are very interesting, and the last remaining ones are places I'd recommend checking out if you're out there and you have a chance to have a barbecue dinner.
Robert, if you're going to a barbecue place and all the meats are on the table, there's pulled pork, there's ribs, pork ribs, beef ribs, brisket, it's all out there. You got to pick one because that's how you're going to rate the place. Do you have a specific meat that you would pick?
Well, this is actually sort of a tough question or a trick question because it depends on where I am.
I figured that.
So
Okay.
if I'm in Eastern North Carolina and they've got a bunch of brisket and ribs laid out, I'm probably not going there. I'm going to go for the pork. And I wouldn't say
Right.
pulled pork because in Eastern North Carolina it's chopped, but I would go for the chopped pork, which is what's the regionally appropriate thing. That's what I want to go to first. I don't think there's any one barbecue meat that is the king barbecue meat. The same way as if I go out to Texas, I am not going to get pulled pork. I
Hey,
just don't. I do not think pork shoulder does well on an offset barbecue pit. It's certainly not as well as it does on a direct heat pit like we do in the Carolinas. However, I'm going to go for the brisket and those ribs, and the offset ribs are their own category, very different than the Alabama style ribs we're talking about. So if I'm Texas, I'm probably going for the old trinity of brisket, pork ribs, and sausage, unless there's like my new thing, which I really love, any kind of more interesting meats. Some of the best meat I've had recently in Texas was lamb. There's so many people doing interesting stuff with lamb out there. If I see duck on a menu or a barbecue menu, I'm probably going to give that a sample. So it depends upon where I am for sure. So yeah, sorry, waffling answer, but I don't think there's any
no,
one right meat. I think it depends upon the context.
no, that's perfect. So, well, I am the one. Lynn, are we ready? Am I
Yeah, come in and I mean,
come
listen,
in? Yeah.
I'd like to keep Robert all night, but that's
Yeah. Okay.
just
All
not
right.
we can't do it. But come in. It's the ninth inning, Doug. We're we're ahead by a run. There's a runner on third. You're coming in. You got to strike out the side. Come on in. Throw that last pitch.
Oh, so I need to go with my controversial possibly question and not the easy one on Charleston.
Ask
Yeah, you probably
both.
don't want to throw the softball if you're trying to strike me
Right. If you
out.
try, that's true. But if I mean, you know, dazzle them with the slow pitch, and then throw one right by him.
Okay. So, all right, Charleston, my favorite restaurant there, because we went there and spent a few days, is Husk. I just loved it. Had something I'd never had, like you said, you want to try something new on the menus and stuff. Pork skin noodles they had, and tile fish, and then rabbit and grits. And so we had all three of those, and they were very amazing. So I know you like to write about the Charleston food scene, and you recently wrote about an article about having a sandwich, having Charleston having a sandwich
Oh,
that they're
about the
known for.
signature sandwich.
Yes, the signature
Yes.
sandwich, and how they don't have one. And I guess maybe in New York, would that be pastrami like at Katz's or something like that?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, New York is a little bit. I don't know if New York has one. The pastrami sandwich is certainly up there. But if you think
The
about the
Katz,
Philadelphia
yeah.
cheesesteak, you
Yeah,
think
of
about the
course.
po' boy or the po' boy in New Orleans. You think about beef on weck in Buffalo. You think about the hot brown sandwich in Louisville. Now, all these cities have these signature sandwiches that are associated with this. I wrote a whole thing about where's Charleston's signature sandwich? We have this great food scene going back many, many years, but there's not a sandwich that you would come to Charleston and say, that's the Charleston sandwich. So I had a whole
Yes.
musing about what it is and how you create it. And honestly, we don't have one. So, and the whole, if you read the piece, which is actually in the Robert F. Moss newsletter, if you want to go back and look for a little signature sandwich theory, it's like you can't just construct it. You can't say, well, what is Charleston known for? Well, it's known for shrimp and grits. So let's take shrimp and grits and let's put it on some kind of bun and make a sandwich out of it. That's not how it happened. Because if you think about the cheesesteak, Philadelphia is not known for steak. I mean, it's known for a lot of things. But it was a sandwich that sort of evolved out of just a couple of restaurants there. I think Pat's originally, right? I think Pat's is credited with
Yes.
doing the original one, and then Geno's came along,
Geno's,
and then
right.
and then
And
everyone
the
else
war
copied
between them.
it.
Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
didn't really get popular until later. So Charleston just doesn't have that yet. So I keep hoping we're going to come up with a sandwich. And so I wrote about that a good bit. Though we certainly have a lot of other signature foods, and you talk about
Yes.
Husk. There,
Yeah.
a lot of creativity here lately, and taking sort of old Southern things and putting new spins on them. But as of yet, I cannot say when you come to Charleston, you have to have this sandwich. The way I'd say if you go to New Orleans, you got to have a po' boy. If you go to,
Yeah.
you
You
know,
would think it'd have to have some sort of fish element to it, or something like I
you
saw
would
one
think,
was
but
a blue crab
counterintuitively,
croissant or something.
most
But
of the
yeah.
signature sandwiches are beef.
Yeah. Okay.
The original
Okay.
po' boy in New Orleans was actually a roast beef sandwich.
Oh.
That was the original one that emerged in the 1930s. It became shrimp and oysters and other things over time. But beef generally is where the signature sandwich start with beef on wick, the
Yeah.
Philadelphia cheesesteak, the hot brown. All these are beef sandwiches. Actually, the hot brown may be turkey, but they're not a meat that you necessarily associate with the city. You don't
Yeah.
think
Yeah. Yeah.
Louisville, great turkey town. It's just a turkey sandwich that happened to develop there.
Well, yeah, and it has to be multiple restaurants cooking it and
Right.
almost having a competition to have the best
Yeah.
one. So yeah, I understand what you're saying. So all right, well, let me ask. Let's talk. Let's
All right.
banter a little bit back and forth. James Beard versus Michelin Star. I know it's been talked about, but it's a hot item here in Texas since Texas paid the $2.7 million and had Michelin there,
And here in the South, because we just
Yeah,
had
they
the
just
Michelin Guide
recently in the
South
South.
came out in November, and we paid we're paying $5 million over 3 years across the
Oh, we got a
American
deal
South.
at 2.7 million.
Well, yeah, but this is like
it's
six
only
states.
Oh,
You've
yeah,
got
we're
one
five
state.
cities. We're five
Yeah,
cities. So
that's
yeah,
right.
but I don't know if I emailed you that article that Mike Sutter, the San Antonio
Yep.
Express. Did you read that one? Because he really grilled Michelin and how they kind of mailed it in, et cetera. But and I'm more of a James Beard guy, and the reason is because it's more diversity, best chef restaurants, there's different categories, and it's like a barbecue contest. When you win, you win.
Yeah.
Now Michelin, you get your star, and then you've got to uphold that star. And what happens when they take it away in the next year? And so you lose some of the joy of getting the star and
Yeah,
the
for
extra
sure.
pressure. So I'm more James Beard than Michelin. And do you agree with that, or would you not?
I would say they're very different. They both have their pros and their cons. Michelin, I mean, I think there's been a lot of talk about Michelin lately, including me talking a lot about
Yeah.
it on
And
various
driving
podcasts.
tourism. Yeah, driving
Yep.
tourism.
And the Michelin Guide is sponsored, at least in most places in the US. Not in New York, not in Chicago, not in California. There, the
Oh,
Michelin produces the guide on their own nickel,
really?
and are sort of self-sustaining. Yep. But Colorado, Texas, Florida, Atlanta, where the sort of these regions got their guides, they were paid for, subsidized by the tourist bureaus in those various cities and states. American South, it was actually 6 states coming together, pooling their money and paying Michelin to send their inspectors. Now,
Yeah.
Michelin will say that, yes, you know, paying the money gets us to come there, but the opinions are totally independent after that. So everything else is pure and clean. Um, James Beard is a totally different world. In full disclosure, I was actually on the James Beard committee many years ago for the Best Chef Southeast, which
Ah,
is sort of it is created. You have a committee sort of that does all the nominations, but then the committee plus all the nominees sort of vote. If you're familiar with the Barbecue Hall of Fame, it sort of works like that. It sort of works a little bit like baseball, where all the sports writers are voting. Um, but the beard is really very much an industry peer recognition, right? You
yeah.
have people who are just sort of picking, nominating, and then you narrow the list down. You narrow the list down through voting and that kind of thing. So if you win a James Beard Award, I think you're right, Doug. You don't get a star. You don't get one, two, three ranking. You either get Best Chef Southeast or you don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
And once you get Best Chef in whatever place you're in, and there are the national ones, you're not eligible for like the next 5 years or something. So
Yeah.
you only get
You,
it one time. You don't have the pressure to keep it.
yeah.
And you go to a big ceremony and all your peers and they're there and you wear tuxedos and they applaud you. So I think it's very, very different. It's sort of it's sort of being singled out by your peers for recognition. Now that has its own bucket of issues, which is like, now it's the old boy network. Now it's like, who you
Mm,
know. Now it's like, how do you get into that mix? It's not very impartial, if you will. Um, it's picked by insiders. Michelin, no one really knows who the inspectors are, and despite all the stuff that's come out about the underwriting of things, the inspectors are pretty much anonymous. I've not heard of any restaurateurs I know who've spotted the inspectors and figured out who they are. So you have that layer of anonymity. However, I think the larger the guides are getting, the more broad they are. I think them doing the American South, I was pretty hard on them in Southern Living for their picks. Not so much because I had any problem with any one pick, but it's just like you can't cover 6 states and uh, and the dining scene. And not only that, but now they're trying to get outside of fine dining. So they're writing about barbecue restaurants. Like, well, you can't really cover barbecue restaurants and fried chicken restaurants and fine dining restaurants in 6 states in a single book. You're really just going to skim the surface. I don't care how big of an army of inspectors you have. I don't mind them being sponsored. I think that's fine. Whatever gets them there. I wish they would limit their focus and just say, hey, we're Michelin, we do fine dining. We're going to pick out that we have a certain
that's fair.
criteria
That's fair.
across the world, and we're going to say, here's what it is. We're not going to try to come to a region and say, here are the best restaurants, hands down in the region. It's got to be within category.
Well, in Texas, we'll just keep all the barbecue stars that they
That's
give
right.
out. It's
And
fine.
there no barbecue restaurants outside of Texas have got a Michelin star.
I know.
So,
I know.
apparently
That's why
we're
I'm just
not worth
rubbing it
visiting
in.
in the
I'm
South.
just rubbing it in.
I'm not bitter.
Robert, we thank you for your time. This has been wonderful. Could you please let everybody know where they can follow you on social media and how to get your books?
Yep. So Robert F. Moss, there's a couple of Robert Mosses out there. I'm the one with the F in the middle. So go to robertfmoss.com, my website. You can follow me at Robert F. Moss on Instagram. The books links are at the website, and then I have a Robert F. Moss newsletter on Substack. Again, you can just Google Robert F. Moss for Substack, or you can go to robertfmoss.com, and there are links to everything there.
Well, thank you very much. We appreciate your time on Baseball and BBQ, and best wishes, best of luck for you, and Happy New Year, and all the best in 2026.
Yeah, same to
Thank
you
you,
guys.
Robert.
Yep. Thanks so much for having me on. It's been great.